In this video, we're going to do a little basic system troubleshooting on a NuTone IM3303 system. This is an IM3303 Master Station. I received an Intercom Repair Request from Michael in Southern California, and what he wrote was his system is 10 years old, and at the time he wrote the request, he says the display works but nothing else. The problem started 3 months ago. It seemed like it got better, then it got worse. At first, the intercom buttons on the master station became unresponsive. Then the radio began to turn on and off by itself. Now the front door speaker has static all the time. There's no intercom or door call function. The radio does not work, and the doorbell does not work. When I push the intercom button on the master station, it makes a clicking noise. When I push the door talk button, it makes no clicking noise. I think the door talk switch is stuck. I poured a little alcohol into the button, but it had no effect. Alcohol is the wrong thing to do. Don't pour alcohol into your intercom. On the surface, it would seem like the problems he described could fall into the typical category of the 10 most common things that go wrong with 3303 systems. The lack of radio, the lack of intercom, the lack of door talk functions, and no door chime. It could have easily been a failed power supply, a failing amplifier. It could also be a failure in the intercom control circuits in the master station. And when those circuits fail, it will often place the system into sort of a limbo mode. The radio doesn't play, the intercom doesn't work, no sound comes out of the system. It's just kind of locked up in this limbo mode. When I talked to Michael about the problems with his system, one of the things I asked him was, is the clock still lit up? And it was. And also, if he tried to play the radio, what happened? And he said sometimes he could get AM or FM to turn on, and the display would show what would be a radio station readout number, and he could tune and scan sometimes, not always, but sometimes. But again, no sound. This was a good sign, because one of the things we worry about on 3303s are problems that have to do with the microcontroller that controls the functions of the master station. The information on the display, the time and the radio station readouts, are generated and controlled directly from the microcontroller. There's nothing in between the microcontroller and the display. It's a direct connection. So generally speaking, 99.9% of the time, if the clock works, we know the microcontroller is okay. So on the surface, it would seem like Michael's problems were one of the common failure points in a 3303 Master Station. But when I read his description of the problems carefully, the thing that stood out, the thing that doesn't fit into the 10 most common things that go wrong for master station failures, is when he wrote, then the radio began to turn on and off by itself. 3303s have the remote music control function, which allows you to turn the radio on from a remote speaker and scroll through your preset radio stations. And when you're done listening to the radio, you can turn the radio off from a remote speaker. That function is what's called a control line feature. It's only accessible from a remote station. There isn't any circuitry in the master station that can allow that to happen on its own. It's not possible, not the way the system is designed. So that was the tip-off that there might be something else going on. The thing that I suspected was he may have a problem with a remote speaker, or he may have a problem with some of the wiring that runs from the master station to each remote speaker. So, like I do for a lot of people, I gave Michael some homework. And now I'm going to show you what the homework was and what I'm going to tell Michael to do and what you can do to try to sort out this type of problem. So before I open up the 3303 Master Station, let's look at something you'll need to know how to do. If you open up the right-hand door of the Master Station, you'll see on the panel there's a variety of controls and adjustments. There's 3 little white buttons which are time set, hours, minutes, and memory set. And just to the right of the memory set button is a little hole in the panel. Inside the hole is the reset button. We're going to need to do a reset as part of the troubleshooting that we're going to be doing next, so you need to know where that is. You'll need a small screwdriver to reach through the hole and push the button. So here I've opened up the 3303 Master Station, and in this example installation you have the 3303 Master Station. In the back of the wall housing is the terminal board, which is where the cables from the remote speakers are connected. In this example, there are 3 cables for 3 remote speakers. Your system may have 2 or it may have 9. Doesn't really make any difference. You just repeat the same steps over and over. The thing that we're most interested in at this point are these black ribbon cables that connect the back of the master station to the terminal board. There are 3 on the right-hand edge, top, middle, and a small one at the bottom, and 1 on the left-hand edge in the center. These are the first step. Since we're doing system troubleshooting, you need to look at your system as a whole. The whole system in your house consists of remote speakers mounted throughout the interior and the patio and the front door of your house. And each of those stations has a cable with 3 wires in it that come back to the master station and are connected to the screws on the terminal board. The master station is connected to the terminal board with these ribbon cables. What we're going to do first to see if Michael's problem was a problem with the master station or whether it's a problem with some other part of the system throughout his house is we're going to isolate the master station from the rest of the system. The easiest and quickest way to do this is to unplug the master station from the terminal board, like this. Small one on the bottom, middle one, top one on the left. What we've done now is we've unplugged the master station from the rest of the system. It's isolated from the terminal board, from the speaker wiring, and the speakers throughout the house. Basically what you have now is a master station that only has an antenna connected to it. It has power, so what you have here basically is a really big, fancy, expensive radio. It's not really an intercom anymore because it's not connected to any speakers that you can talk to. You can unplug these connections while the system is powered up. You don't have to turn the system off. In fact, it's more productive to do it while it's powered. After Michael unplugged the 4 ribbon cables from the terminal board, the next thing I told him to do was a reset of the master station. If the master station has been locked into some oblivious mode for a long period of time, it may not self-clear itself when you unplug it from the terminal board. It's just quicker and easier to do a reset. Again, the reset button is behind the hole to the right of the memory set button. Take your small screwdriver, insert it into the hole, push the switch until you feel it go click, and hold it for 5 seconds. Once you release it, it will reset the microcontroller in the master station. The clock will be flashing. It will either say 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock depending on when your unit was made. You will have erased all of the preset radio stations in the memory buttons for AM and FM, so those have to be programmed again. And as it turns out, in Michael's case, after he unplugged the cables to isolate the master and he did a reset of the master station, his master station worked properly again. What he wrote me was, I did as you said. At first the radio did not work, then I did a reset. I moved the master slide switch repeatedly in and out of the radio intercom position and it sprang to life. Now the radio works perfectly, the front door chime works, only from the master station, and what he means by that is you can only hear it ring at the master station because the master station is still unplugged from the terminal board, so therefore it's isolated from the remote speakers so they're not connected to the system. And the door talk, intercom, and end call buttons all make clicking noise now when I push them. I think you said to wait a few days before the next step. This is to give the system enough time to see if it is a master station problem and you do a reset, the problem may not reoccur immediately, and it's always good to give a problem a fair chance to see if it's going to happen again. In Michael's case, I don't think it's necessary to wait. I'm pretty sure that we've got it down to something with the wiring or remote speakers. He says, I am thinking the problem may be one of the stations or the wire runs to the stations. Should I connect the stations one at a time and see if the problem reappears? That's what we're going to do next. I'm going to show you how to troubleshoot to narrow down which wire or which speaker is causing this. So let's talk about the wiring and the terminal board. Again, the terminal board is where the cables from the remote speakers are connected. In this example installation, you have one set of 3 on number 1, one set of 3 on number 2, and one set of 3 on number 3. This is genuine NuTone wire. Your system hopefully has real NuTone wire. Sometimes they don't. You might have telephone wire or some more generic wire that's colored differently than NuTone wire. The only thing that's really important is to keep track of which color goes on what screws. You'll notice that the NuTone terminal board is labeled a color for each screw connection. Red, which is also silver wire, is the top. Of course, the center is the center wire in a flat ribbon cable. And the other third wire is blue or a copper wire, and they have to be connected to the correct terminals. The simple explanation of how these wires are used will help you do your troubleshooting more efficiently. On a 3-wire NuTone system, the center wire is considered a common wire. It's used for both the radio and for the intercom. So center or common with red is what the radio plays on. Center and blue is what makes the intercom work. Now this is a simplified explanation. It is a little more complicated than that, but for our troubleshooting purposes, it doesn't make any difference. The easiest way to troubleshoot a problem like Michael's system has, which is the radio being turned on and off by itself, the door speaker has static all the time, and there's no intercom or door functions, is to simply disconnect and remove all of the 3 conductor cables from where they're terminated on the terminal board. All you have to do is loosen the screws and remove the wires. What I like to do to keep track of them, and I do this when I'm at customers' houses, this wire came from terminal number 1. I use a black Sharpie and I simply make one line on it. When I go to do the next one, and take it off of terminal number 2, I put 2 marks on it. It's a fast and easy way to do it. You certainly can put masking tape and write numbers on it. It gets a little clunky when you do that. Marking the wires is usually good enough. The other thing which is important to remember is if your system doesn't have genuine NuTone colored wire, if yours is wired with phone wire, which you might have red and yellow and black or some other thing, use your camera phone and take a picture of it before you take it apart so you can refer back to it to see how it was hooked up. Now I've disconnected all of the ribbon wires from the remote speakers, so basically the terminal board is now bare. There's no wires connected to it at all. In most installations you'll have one wire on each of the door speaker terminals. You can leave those connected. You don't have to disconnect those. The door speaker line can't cause the kind of problems that Michael is having, so it's rarely a problem. The next step would be to simply turn the radio on so it's playing and you can hear it. And while it's playing, plug the master station back into the terminal board. And you simply have to reinsert the 4 ribbon cables into the terminal board. At this point, it's very likely the radio will continue to play. The only time it would stop playing or the problem that you originally observed would reoccur is if for some reason you had a faulty terminal board, which almost never happens. So now we know the master station is good because we've tested it while it was disconnected from the rest of the system. And we've plugged the master station back into the terminal board and it's still working, so we know the terminal board is good. What we're doing here is we're building upon a known condition. We know the master is good. The next step was to add the terminal board back into the equation. The master still works properly, so we know the terminal board is good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add the wires back onto the... So here we have the cable for remote station number 1. These wires originally came off the terminal board for spot number 1, and now we're simply going to reconnect them. What I like to do is start at the top. We'll put the red or silver wire back on its particular screw. And tighten it down. We'll put the center wire back on. And then the blue wire. In most cases, for most installations that have a wiring or a speaker problem, you're only going to have one that's a problem, one cable or one station. So you add back the first one, you add it back on while the system is on and the radio is playing. You're using the radio or the master station as a piece of test equipment, because when you hook up the bad wire or that has the bad speaker connected to it, it's going to affect the radio and it's going to stop working. So that's how you know it's bad. So I've reconnected number 1, and let's assume that the system still works, and I'm going to continue on and connect number 2. And when I connect number 2, all of a sudden everything goes bad. There's static, maybe the radio switches off. You're back to where you started before you started to troubleshoot the problem. It's very likely that cable number 2, it's either the cable or the speaker, is bad. So we're going to take number 2 back off and push it off to the side, and we'll continue on and we'll put on number 3. And if your system has more speakers than that, you do 4 and then 5 and then 6 and so on until you connect them all. If you're unlucky, you'll have a system that may have more than one problem. If you had, for instance, mice in your attic and they chewed on the wires and the wires are all bunched together at that point, the mouse might have chewed on 3 or 4 wires and you might find more and more problems. Every wire that you reconnect that causes a problem, disconnect it and leave it off to the side. You want to see how many problems you actually have. Once you get all of the good wires reconnected, you should have a functioning system except for the speakers that have been left disconnected. So now the question is, you've got your working speakers reconnected, your master station is working properly, and the speakers that have been reconnected to the terminal board are working properly, but what do you do with the 2 lines for the 2 rooms that cause problems? Well, the next step would be you want to make a quick determination whether it's a problem with the wire or a problem with the remote speaker. Inside remote speakers are rarely a problem, but it can happen. Outdoor patio stations, not front door entry speakers, but actual patio stations that play music, they're more likely to be a source of problems because they've been outside in the weather, and if they get water or moisture in them, it can cause corrosion on the circuit board, which causes short circuits, which can cause problems with the system. So what you need to do now is you need to go throughout your house while the radio is playing on the master station and find the 2 rooms that the speakers are not working. Those are the rooms that you're going to look at next. So here we're looking at the back of what we'll call speaker number 2. This is one of the lines that we left disconnected at the master station, and we suspect that either the speaker or the cable has a problem. Here you can see the other end of the NuTone 3-conductor flat ribbon cable, and it's connected to the appropriate screw terminals on the back of the switchboard. These are labeled just like at the master station. You have red or silver, center or gray in this case, and blue or copper. So these connections correspond with the connections on the terminal board. What we do at this point, we need to isolate things and shrink down the system to find out where the problem lies. So what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the 3 wires from the back of the speaker. And this will be, of course, hanging out of your wall. And what you want to do is you want to leave the wire disconnected. We'll move the speaker out of the way. And you don't want the bare ends of the wires to touch each other. Shorted or short-circuited wires on an intercom system are always bad, so you want to leave them separated. If you're concerned, there is no electricity in this. It's just audio, so it can't hurt you. You can go like this. It doesn't matter. If you're worried about leaving the bare wires, take a little bit of masking tape and put it over the ends just to cover them up. Now what you're going to do is you're going to go back to the master station. You're going to find cable number 2, which is what this one is, and you're going to reconnect the 3 wires onto terminal board spot number 2. When you hook up the wires, if the system still seems to operate correctly and the problems that you had originally don't reoccur, you know that there's a problem with the remote speaker. It's unlikely, unless of course it's a patio station. If it's a patio station, you'll probably be able to see corrosion and water damage from where it's gotten wet. Most of the time, probably 95% of the time, when you go back to the master station and hook up the other ends of this cable, the problem will reoccur and you'll be back where you started. You've then identified that you have a problem with a shorted wire between the master station and this room. That's a harder problem to solve, and it requires a little more technical expertise and a little bit of equipment to figure out if only 2 of the wires are shorted or 3 of the wires are shorted. If only 2 wires are shorted, you can still have room number 2 have limited use and hook it up so the radio will play. If all 3 wires are shorted together, the wire is useless. Number 2 speaker will never work properly unless you replace the wire between the master station and this room. In some houses that's easy, in some houses that's hard. I hope this video helps you and helps you troubleshoot the problems with your NuTone IM3303 system. If it does help you, please like the video on YouTube. If you think the video is useful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It raises our rankings on YouTube, which means other people with similar problems to the ones you're having with your system will find our video easier, and it'll benefit them also. Thanks a lot. See you on the next one.